that we were going to have a separate session with the respondents to give you guys a little bit of insights into the integrated evaluation framework. I have Francois, who I have to say, and I've said it many times, and I've said it on LinkedIn, he is the star of the show when it comes to measurement, not only locally, but I think internationally as well. So it's really cool to have you, Fran, on board, and he'll take you through the integrated framework. And Dr. Tersia Landsberg Boshoff, who helps us with this research. She did her thesis on measurement, so she's really the right person to take us through measurement, evaluation, etc. And it's really exciting the way it's moving. But also, we want this interactive. So whoever's got questions, please just let's talk about those questions, how you have it, because really the session is, when we were looking at the survey, 60% of the respondents were familiar with the Barcelona principles. But the scary bit was that 40% were unaware of it. So why are 40% of people unaware of the Barcelona principles? So is it our communication? Is it Amex communication? What is it? So we thought, let's create this webinar really to start building up the familiarity with the Barcelona principles, what they have, what they achieve, how can we integrate it into our business lives. Out of the 60% that were familiar with the Barcelona principles, one of the other significant findings was that 34% haven't implemented the framework or the Barcelona principles. Mostly they said because of budgets, they were citing budgets because of it, but I don't think budgets is really the reasons, because you can implement the Barcelona principles and it doesn't cost you anything. So really this whole thing is really about training the guys that actually, and thanking you for actually responding to the survey, but also helping everybody who wants to know more about the integrated framework and how we do it. So before we get into it, Ed, if you can just put up, I'm just going to give a quick 3 sliders about the trends in marketing, because I think this will flow beautifully into the presentation that Fran has around the Barcelona principles, around the integrated framework, and some of the awards that people have won. So one of the important things is that consumers don't look at, is it PR, is it advertising, is it social? They create their ideas, their perspective, their reputation of the brand through all the messages they get across everywhere. So brands, as well as agencies, we all need to, and research companies, we all need to work together. We need to collaborate, but also all the marketing channels, be it paid, owned, earned, shared, it doesn't really matter. All these need to really work in unison rather than in silos. I think what's important, and you'll see when Fran starts talking about the integrated framework, how we need to understand and focus on messaging. There's a proliferation of content, and Fran often talks about sending out stuff. And I think this is the really important: is how do we focus on this, on content that actually resonates with a particular target, and then measure that, and we'll talk about it going forward. Personalization at scale. How do we personalize those messages to those particular target audiences? When I wrote this article about the trends for 25, I spoke about AI fatigue. Every conference I went to, and I'm sure every conference any one of us go to, everybody talks about AI. The problem is they're only scraping the top of the iceberg, so we're not getting deep into that, into AI. So we all understand what AI does, what it should do, how it's benefiting us, etc. So I feel that there's more and more AI fatigue, specifically at these conferences. But we're all using that content, and as PR professionals, as research companies, as advertising agencies, as brands, whatever, we take AI and we use this tool. And so we need to not utilize AI only and take it, copy, paste, and put it into the content, but we need to ensure that there's authentication in the content that we actually create. Once we're creating it, we need to measure what's critical. We need to measure what's important, and ensure. I mean, everybody is price sensitive at the moment. So how do we ensure the efficiency of our communication? But also, how do we align all our key performance indicators that align with the communication that we're doing? The world moves quickly, and AI has helped us move even quicker than we anticipated before. So we need to be flexible, but also experiment on embracing the new tools, experiment on testing new strategies. But again, if you're measuring it and you're becoming effective around it, you learn what works, what doesn't work, and it really becomes an advantage when you find things that really work, because hopefully your competitors are not doing that, and you're continuously learning and adapting to this experimentation and flexibility that you have. So in conclusion, the marketing industry is really going through a transformation. So integrating our trends, integrating our communication, but understanding how do we get the best out of our communication is what we want to try and achieve today with Francois' presentation and with Tersia's headspace in her research. So thanks, Ed. I think Fran wants his through, so you can take that down. So without further ado, Fran, if you can just take us through your presentation on this, and then we'll have questions and answers, and we'll just debate some issues. So we're looking forward to it.
Great, thank you, Oresti. Ed, Oresti, can you guys see?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I've been giving a challenging task today to speak about the Barcelona principles and the integrated evaluation framework, which was developed to implement the principles in an effective way into a communications plan. But I've only been given 20 minutes, so that's the challenge today. But I've going to try and touch the most salient points and do it in a very hopefully understandable and easily digestible kind of manner. So the Barcelona Principles was originally declared in 2010 by AMEC. Now, AMEC is the world's largest media intelligence and measurement and evaluation association, which was founded almost 30 years ago and has got membership in more than 90 countries worldwide, servicing tens of thousands of clients. Ornico is the only full member of AMEC in Africa, and that's something we need to work on so that our continent also adopt all these kind of principles. So like I said, the Barcelona Principles was declared in 2010. We are currently sitting on the third iteration of the principles. So every 5 years it gets updated according to how society and the world's changed. And the fourth iteration will be launched later this year. So we're looking forward to see how that will look like. But I'm going to start off my presentation with a great case study, which won the LionCon Grand Prix last year, but also the Grand Prix at the MEC Awards for a campaign. And I was very privileged to serve as a judge last year. So I actually judged this particular entry, and I thought it was really one of the best ones I've seen in a long time. So without further ado, let's have a look at this case study.
Test for up to 10 years because it makes them feel old. But while hearing loss is isolating and scary, mishearing can actually be a lot of fun. Now I thought I'd share some of my favorite misheard lyrics. Philippe's not your dog. Friends with the monster. Specsavers aim to create a hearing test people wanted to listen to. That's where this guy came in. Rick's biggest hit is one the world has been mishearing for years. So we scanned the internet for the song's most misheard lyrics, rewrote the song, and got Rick to re-record it, creating the misheard version. Then released it to the nation's ears without explanation as the world's first mass hearing test, causing chaos across socials.
Did you just hear Rick sing My Aunt's Been Naked? I've been singing the wrong lyrics the whole time.
Wouldn't catch this. Rick, what is happening?
Did I just get Rick rolled by Rick Astley?
Igniting a national conversation on hearing loss.
Rick Astley.
Rick Astley.
Rick Astley.
This is a really clever idea because people with hearing loss mishear.
I'm absolutely loving the resurgence of Rick Astley. Everybody's hoping the revamped song will encourage more people to get their ears checked.
The misheard version was played over 20 million times in the first 8 hours, driving a 138% increase in hearing loss searches, making hearing the country's #1 trending topic, leading Specsavers hearing test bookings to increase a record 1,220% above target, without a single pound of media investment. Finally, the nation had listened.
So an absolute great case study, and seeing that I started with Rick Astley, I'll be finishing with Rick Astley as well, and just illustrate how this whole campaign fitted squarely into the integrated framework. So let's look at why the Barcelona principles are important. At the end of the day, it sets an overarching framework. It helps you align your communications with business and the organizational objectives and strategies, and it becomes the basis for measurement and evaluation programs. And let's dig into these kind of principles. So, as I mentioned, we're on version 3. These have evolved slightly through the years and will continue to evolve. But principle 1 really says that setting measurable goals is an absolute prerequisite to communications planning, measurement, and evaluation. And I think this is really one that people tend to forget about, but you need to have very specific measurable goals. Indeed, SMART goals. I'm sure many of us are familiar with SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. And if we look at the typical objective of a PR or a communication plan, it could be things like attracting new customers, or creating product awareness, or brand promotion, or reputation and crisis management, or media awareness and positive coverage. But if we make these SMART, let's say we want 5,000 downloads of our product brochure in 90 days. Or we want to increase positive X commentary by 15% in 16 days, or increase customers by 20% in 6 months. Suddenly it becomes much easier to not only track and measure if you're reaching those targets, but also to align and improve your tactics and strategies to kind of achieve those kind of objectives. So SMART objectives is really crucial once you plan your campaigns, because you need to know what success will look like eventually, or the lack thereof. Principle 2 looks at measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes, and potential impact. So what is an output? This is typically where people stop measuring. We had 30 articles for the month, and we reached 2 million people. But we also look at what kind of topics that we talk about. You know, if there's a specific message we need to put out there, we need to focus on that message. What is our share of voice? What is the clip counts, for instance, or that on social, or even event attendance? This is not just for media coverage or social media conversation, because we all know public relations communication is much bigger than just that. It could be something like an event, which is an output. Whereas an outcome rather looks at, you know, how did people engage with your content? How many viewed it? Was there an increased awareness? Was there downloads? Is someone advocating for your organization? Did we create leads, if that was the objective? Then principle 3 really looks at outcomes and impact should be identified for stakeholders, society, and the organization. in the first iteration of the principles, it really said outcomes should be identified for the business. But there's a lot more at play these days, particularly after COVID. I mean, society in large, the organization, other stakeholders, all can be affected. I mean, we all know what happened with clicks and their supposed racist hair advert in the EFF closing down some of the shops, or the Dis-Chem internal memo about not appointing any white workers, which became a massive PR disaster for them. All these are kinds of communications, but the broader impact couldn't be considered. And so we need to think about the implications. You know, it may look all good to us, but for some members of society, it could be seriously problematic. So we need to try and identify these issues. Communication measurement and evaluation should include both qualitative and quantitative analysis. Principle 4, yes, you need to count things. You know, there's 30 clips for the month, or 30,000 people mentioned us on Twitter, but we also need to look at the quality. For instance, in this example here, a lot of social media conversations about this particular entity's leadership not being visible is a disappointment. But if we look at their media coverage, leadership really features nowhere. So there's something we need to learn from this. The quality of these kind of analysis, we need to give more visibility to our leadership, because people complain they don't see them. So quantity and quality, very important. Principle 5, this one has stayed relatively the same since the original principles. AVEs are not the value of communication. I know who had absolutely smashed their AVEs out of the park the last week. Eskom, of course. I mean, I'm very well familiar with their media coverage, and their AVE spiked beautifully over the last few days, as we all know. So is that a value for them? No, it is really detrimental to them, even though their AVEs climbed hugely. Principle 6, holistic communication, measurement and evaluation includes all relevant online and offline channels. And this is ties into what Oresti was saying. You know, the audience isn't sitting there and thinking, wow, this was a beautiful media release from the agency, which I just read about, the brand. Or this was an amazing creative advertisement on television, and I fall exactly into that target demographic. You need to consider all these kind of communications, and it's called the PESO model, paid media, which is the advertising stuff, even LinkedIn promoted posts. There's the earned media, which is your media relations, earned coverage, typically from a media release. There's the shared media on things like socials, and there's the owned media. Don't underestimate your own brand journalism, your website, your webinars, your own social media channels. All these need to work in conjunction. And then the final principle, really looking at measurement and evaluation, are rooted in integrity and transparency to drive learning and insights. And a lot of the time we find people massaging, you know, the insights really to make them always look good. We know not all campaigns are successful. We need to be truthful with ourselves so that we can determine what worked, what didn't work, so that we don't waste time and effort on activities which absolutely does nothing for our organization. I mean, integrity, there's things like copyright. You know, everyone wants to go behind the paywalls of publications without paying for it. You know, there's the privacy issues like on social media. And an important issue here is, based on the last principle, is that measurement and evaluation needs recommendations. What worked, what didn't work, how do we improve this next time? Now, a lot of people thought, okay, these principles are all nice and well, but how do I practically apply it? We've seen in the research, everyone thinks it's an expensive exercise, it's complicated, so we're not going to do it. but we'll just show you how easy it is. The reality is measurement, planning, all of that is a continuous cycle. But what we tend to do is think about measurement and evaluation once it's too late. We've done a whole campaign. We didn't set up specific, very smart objectives. We've just sent out all this content. And now afterwards, 2 months later, we want to see, okay, what happened because of it? Then it's too late. You need to have this continuous cycle. And that's why the framework which MEC developed to implement the principles are really so crucial. And hopefully in our example here, we'll see how easy it is. It's really a project management approach. Project management has been a staple of business since the 1960s already. You know, there's a certain business objective. What kind of inputs do we need? What kind of activities do we need to do? What is our outputs? What is the eventual outcome? And then business impact. So this is then just applied to communications planning, and then to really set those specific KPIs, those objectives, so that you can measure it as you go along in a continuous cycle. The reality is, instead of AVEs, we are given a huge menu of different options. Now, I think personally, this is where people get intimidated, because there's so many different kind of KPIs and metrics that one can look at. But the reality is you only need to use the ones that's relevant. And we'll see that now in the Rick Astley example. But inputs, for instance, would be, what do you need in preparation for your communication? Okay, you need obviously objectives. Does your communication objectives align with the organization? Do you have a budget? What kind of resources do you need? Do you need to get agencies? Do you have the internal capacity? And what kind of targets are you setting? You know, what's your key performance indicators? Activities is really the things you do and plan to produce your communication. Is there some kind of research? Is there production happening? You know, like from a graphic design perspective, media buying, writing, media releases, speaking to your media partners. Is there baselines and benchmarks from previous campaigns that you can use? Is there certain things you need to test, like for instance, pre-test data? What is your evaluation plan? And then we get to outputs. That is what you put out, that is received by your target audiences. So what is your distribution? What does your exposure look like? You know, what is your publicity volume? What's your reach? Or your impressions, or your share of voice, or even your tone and sentiment. You look at your outcomes. That is the effects that your communication had on audiences. So output is what you put out there. Outcomes is something that happens because you did the output. Is there an increase in knowledge about your organization? Is there an attitude change? Is there an increase in trust or advocacy? Is there statements of support? Do we have increased registrations, even for something like blood donors? Is there a brand preference? And the eventual impact, which takes over a period of time, the results that are caused in full or in part by your communication. So did you improve your reputation, if that was your objective? Is there improvement in relationships? Is there complying actions from your audience? Is there specific targets being met? We wanted to increase blood donors by 10%. Or is there a sales increase, if that is what our objective was? Is there cost savings? Is there staff retention? So all these kind of things can come into play. But like I said, I think the total huge menu that people have for this is maybe intimidating. So let's look at how Specsavers and their agency did this. So here is our framework. We look at the inputs, the activities, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts. So really, what was the inputs? They wanted to increase test bookings, hearing test bookings. So, I mean, we don't see how much they wanted to increase it by, but yeah, I've just put 1,000 bookings. That's our objective. Then they did some research. You know, people wait way too long before they do hearing tests because they think it will make them look good or look old. So that's not cool, but misheard lyrics is fun. So let's explore that. Okay, Rick Astley, a lot of people mishear Never Gonna Give You Up's lyrics. So yeah, we've got a little bit of a human truth, which we can utilize to speak to our audience. So those were the kind of inputs. What kind of activities did they do? Obviously, they had to get Rick Astley's buy-in, re-record the track. They got the broadcasters buy-in. They created a little bit of a YouTube video, which they uploaded. Then the output, obviously, they launched the radio campaign at the same time with the YouTube video. Our outcomes being 20 million views in the first 8 hours. I mean, that's phenomenal. 138% increase in online searches for hearing loss, making it the #1 trending topic. And major mainstream media discussions, which obviously amplified this hugely. So those were outcomes, then impacts 1,220% increase in bookings. Now, if we consider our target was 1,000, that means there was 12,200 bookings. And we can even make this to a financial impact. If it cost £20 for a booking, so our target was £20,000, but we actually achieved £244,000 in income. So you can put a financial measurement there. And then obviously other issues such as award wins, etc., etc. So the reality is you can do it quite easily without having a lot of costs, and you can keep it simple. And the big thing is really setting those objectives as per principle 1. It is crucial to have that specific objectives, and then in your impact, you can link that back to your objective and say, look at this, we've increased it by 1,200%. A very good way to illustrate to your client how successful the campaign was. So make all these kind of resources are free on the web, so you can go and Google it, or you can come and speak to us. We're very familiar with it. We serve on the board of a MEC, so we know these better than anyone else in Africa. But really, it's a life changer for all the guys who've adopted it, making their lives much easier and their communication much more effective. Thank you.
Fantastic, Fran. Thank you. And I know that there's a couple of questions that are kind of coming in. So, Tersia, I think maybe let's answer a couple of questions before I go into some of your stuff. I know that Eddie's going to actually provide these. Okay, so what's the biggest misconception about pure measurement in the industry? So, Tersh, do you want to take that before I go to Francois on that?
I think the biggest misconception is that it's difficult. I think people build it up, exactly what Fran said, people build it up in their head so much, and I think that it has to come from specialist agencies. It has to be this dedicated effort at the end where it's really not that difficult. If you set out to do something and you can articulate that in a way that you actually have that SMART goal, then measurement is the most natural, easiest flow from that. And that's what I think. Fran?
Yeah, I think also, like you said, it's difficult and expensive. It's not, I mean, I've seen a lot of case studies through my years being a judge, and the guys who's been the most successful are small NGOs, not-for-profits, who's got like one communications guy and no budget. And just because they applied the principles, they could make it so much more effective. Instead of sending out 100 press releases, which takes a lot of effort and time and all of that, they could do one Facebook post, which caused mayhem and was a huge success. Mm. But if you don't know what works and what doesn't work, you're just going to keep on doing the same thing and not knowing if you're really successful. And, changing those AVEs, because if it's high, we're successful. Look at how successful Eskom is. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think one other issue probably aligns back to what Tersia was saying, and that it becomes difficult, is that I think a lot of people think it's time consuming. Sometimes when we sit and do the workshops with clients, it's like, okay, what are the messages that you want to achieve? But so it's kind of time consuming, but I think it's critical, because if you're not thinking about it beforehand, you can always misalign your communication. So it starts, if you're a PR practitioner, it just gives much more value to your client. If you are a brand, it gives you a better view of what you want to intend to do, and which messages go to which target market, etc. But I think what happens is we think it's a lot of time, but if you put the time up front, it saves time going forward, because you kind of achieve the results that you want to. So I think that's what I think is one of the big misconceptions. Yeah. Okay, I know there's another question. How do you balance qualitative and quantitative measurement in PR reporting? This is spot on for you, Tersia, because you often talk about that.
Now it's difficult, because it's going to look different for every campaign and every strategic effort. This is going to look different, and it's going to be skewed in favor of qualitative or quantitative. But I feel like a simple rule to follow is start with your quantitative measurements, start with your numbers, and then interpret that with qualitative analysis. So it's always start with your numbers and then back that up with your discussion, with your in-depth look. And your numbers will tell you where to go and look for more qualitative answers as well. Because somewhere where the numbers doesn't add up, where it doesn't make sense, that's where you need to dig deeper, not just put it out and leave it on face value and say, well, that's what the numbers say, I don't really know. That's where your qualitative adds value, and that's where it becomes almost imperative that you follow that through with the conversational addressing of that piece that you're struggling with of the numbers.
Friend, do you have anything else to add? Yeah, I think it's important to do both, but I agree with Tersia. If start with the quantity, the numbers, because that will indeed show you something which looks. I mean, let's use a simple example. I've had 10 Eskom mentions a month, and then last Saturday I had 100. So why is that spike there? Okay, let's go and dig deeper. What's the quality behind it? Oh, look, we had 100 million AVE this month. Let's look at it. It's great. Oh, it's all negative coverage. They're all criticizing us. Or, how's my representative performing? Looking at a Eskom, it's one good thing I can say for them, is that their representatives are indeed very visible in the media. Kotsienso Ramakopa is there, Nteto Nyati is there, Daphne Mukwena is there. And they, despite the difficult circumstances, at least these guys are visible and keeping the public informed. So that's another kind of qualitative kind of insight. How are people performing? So you do need both, but I think a lot will be guided, if you look at the quantitative, as Tersia was saying first. And the reality is as well, that's the easiest, the quantitative. You've got the data.
Yeah. And I think it's easiest, but it's also something that most people are already used to in the PR space, in terms of the quantitative stuff. I want to know share of voice. I want to know AVEs, etc. So it's already quantitative anyway within that space. But I also do think when you're asking how do you balance quantitative with and quantitative. And yes, we do start on quant first because it does make it easier, but also, what are you trying to achieve? You need to try and understand. So what insights are you trying to get at the end of the day, to try and flush out your impact at the end of the day? So it may mean, let's say maybe one of the objectives that come from management is that we need to increase our reputation. You may have to do some quant beforehand to actually understand, well, what are people saying about your reputation? Because if you don't know something, you can't bring out any press releases, or you can't do any marketing connectivity around there. So you might have to do some surveys and some qualitative surveys around there. But yes, in order, from a basic perspective, I think start on quant. It's much easier, and it's something that people are used to. So yeah, I know that there's more questions. Let's do another question quickly. Another two, okay. What challenges do you face in linking PR effort to business outcomes? Fran, I'll give you that one initially.
Okay, so the reality is, if you do your planning properly, if you set up your planning through the framework, it's not just about a afterthought. If you do it, it will be much easier to link your PR efforts to business outcomes. I think this is where a lot of the industry is really struggling, because they do not follow the first principle that you have to have a very specific objective. And that objective needs to align with the business objective or the organizational objective. If your objective is, let's say I work for the Department of Health, I want to decrease smoking levels in South Africa by 10% over a 2-year period. 2 years later, I've got R1 million, 10 billion rand AVE. That doesn't align. That's not what the objective was. So, of course, there's a lot of challenges, but if you set it up and you define it, what is the PR effort and the business question you want to resolve up front, and you determine how you can measure that success, it is much easier to do that. But again, like I said, you need to align. I'm a bank. I'm launching a new credit card. Now my comms team are talking about home loans, but I want to push the credit card. So you're not going to align a business outcome because they're not aligned. So you need to ensure very much that your communication objectives are aligned to what the business problem is or what the business is trying to achieve. If you do that and you know how you can measure it and what kind of measurements and KPIs you need, then it becomes very easy. But if you don't and you treat it as an afterthought, then it becomes almost impossible.
And we can see from the data, the people that responded to our survey this year, almost 70% are saying they have strategic access. They have a direct line of communication with insights to the top decision makers in their companies. So really, when 70% of them say they have access to the business goals, they have access to where the business is strategically heading, then there's no excuse not to be aligning your communication with that. It's again concerning that 30% don't have, but one issue at a time.
Yeah, I think if I can add to that, this is really one of AMEC's big strategic objectives, is to educate and professionalize the public relations and communications industry. I think I studied PR. I've been in the PR comms world for 30 years. Tersia, both you and I are quite involved from an academic side, and those guys are really getting trained very well. But I find, and this is again just my personal observation, there's a lot of fly-by-night guys. They've got a little course they did somewhere. Now they're supposedly a PR expert. And those people are damaging the industry.
Yes.
When I started, I'd never heard of a thing such as an AVE. You get to the industry, that's all they talk about. Now, we need to move the industry on from this towards a professional place. Now, going back to the 70% who's got access to the C-suite and the strategic decision-making, they need to be asking those questions. They should be the experts from communication and guide the organization on how to address this. And it's concerning for me that I suspect, and my experience tells me this, is that they don't ask the right questions from management. They, they're very, I want to almost say scared to ruffle feathers, and they just want to continue doing what they've always been doing. We're going to send out a media release about something, and see what.
And do a couple of Facebook posts.
Yeah, and see what happens because of this. But we don't know how to measure it, and I think that's the problem. We need to really step up as a communications industry and become more professional. We need to understand the language of business. I think a lot of us don't. We don't want to do accounting. We don't want to know about maths or numbers. But unfortunately, I think from a business perspective, that's how businesses and organizations work. There's a bottom line. There's revenue. There is reputation. If the reputation is bad, the revenue goes down. So we do need to put effort into that educational kind of approach.
It brings us back nicely to Oresti's point at the beginning of this conversation that we cannot operate in silos. The second we start operating in silos, you will face challenges in linking your PR efforts to your business outcomes.
Exactly. I mean, if you as a communicator are held responsible to increase sales for the organization, you better have access to the sales figures.
Yes.
Otherwise, how are you ever going to prove that? And
Yeah.
I think that's the reality.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I do think one of the other challenges that sometimes that both business, so brands are a little concerned about, agencies express that concern. So when you talk about what challenges do you face about linking PR efforts to business outcomes, sometimes is that, we as marketers sometimes can do a lot of PR activity and we align it and we've got our objectives and everything. But within business, the distribution system has fallen apart. So if the objective is to increase sales, we do all that we can on the marketing side and we increase visibility, but then there's no distribution out to the market. So sales don't ultimately happen. But there's an advantage here as well. Is if these don't happen, you can identify some of those issues, go back to business and say, listen, guys, we did what we needed to do. These are the objectives that we had. These are the impact that we've had, but we didn't get the impact of increasing sales by 1,000% because we didn't get our operations right. Let's get this right going forward. So it's not up to so the PR efforts are done and we've achieved what we needed to do. But the impact, the business impact wasn't there at the end of the day. And that's why sometimes PR agencies and brands fear about doing these objectives. No, and aligning it with the business objectives. No, that shouldn't be a fear. It actually gives you an opportunity to engage with business around it. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. That's it. I was just going to say, let's move on with questions. We have, what advice do you have? Thank you for all those questions, Nose. I think, or Nossi, it's really cool to have these. What advice do you have for employees who are stuck in silos and do not have the freedom needed? I'm not sure I understand that. Tersia or Fran, can you answer that? What advice do you have for employees who are stuck in silos and do not have the freedom needed?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, I'm a young PR person in an agency I want to explore and improve my skills and provide better value, but my agency just wants to look at clip counts and AVE, for instance. So I think that, again, education is an absolute critical thing, not just in our industry, in any kind of industry. I mean, we know all the challenges we face as a country, but if you look at something like a MEC and all the resources they've created, I mean, the whole objective is not to make money. A MEC is not a money-making kind of organization. It's a volunteer organization where the industry works together to improve the professionalization of the industry for everyone involved. So there's a lot of those kind of educational resources. I would recommend, that you do some of those courses, that you read up. You don't need to go to university. There's a lot of free open source kind of case studies, courses you can do to at least improve your own skills. And the reality is, this is where the world's moving. If you look at a MEC membership, when the original Barcelona principles were established in 2010, about 85% of AMEC clients, so all the AMEC memberships clients, still use the AVEs as their main measurement. That's dropped to like 7% at the moment. So the world's changing, and we need to adapt, particularly the way we've become more globalized. There's a lot of global companies. You may be doing work for the South African leg of it, but now suddenly global says you need to adapt this. And unfortunately, if you haven't prepared, you're going to fall off the bus. You're going to become irrelevant. So we need to prepare for that, because that change is happening all over the world.
Yes.
Definitely places like Europe and the US is further advanced down that measurement journey than us, but it's also coming for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other, as a joke, I mean, if you don't, what happens with these employees, just send your boss a link to this video so that they can see. or to AMEC, and just give them a little piece of paper underneath their desk.
To add to that,
add to it, Tish.
Add to it, Fran, from an academic perspective, there's also a foundation, a culture and a foundation of integrity that needs to be present in the organization that you're in, where they adopt a symmetrical worldview, where they value the flow of communications. If that is not going to be the case, and you're in a company with an extremely asymmetrical worldview, where they intentionally have a habit of isolating information and cutting off lines of communication, then it's going to be very difficult to achieve that freedom, because then it's the culture and the leadership of the organization that's literally not going to allow for that. In that situation, as a communications professional, build your network and build your relationships with people in the organization, because that's going to be your backline communication, and that's going to drip information into you, and then you are going to be sitting with the most information in the company, and that's going to make you very valuable.
Very valid point.
I think it all speaks to Principle 7, transparency and integrity.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very valid. But also, I think one of the points that you said, Tersia, is also, I mean, your network is your net worth at the end of the day. So I think as younger PR professionals, as not only the network internally, but the network externally, that becomes absolutely important. So attend those conferences, you'll learn out of that.
Yes.
I know sometimes it's difficult because there's monetary issues, etc. But there's, like Fran said, there's free online courses around that. But also you find, you'll find employers that maybe will align with what you want at the end of the day. So, they may not be stuck in those particular silos. That's, gives you that, as Tersia said, that flexibility. Yeah. So that's, I think, if there's no other questions, Tersia, you wrote a really cool article about, and we've got literally 10 minutes, so maybe we can talk about that or the effectiveness in the digital age. But let's talk about the article you wrote around burnout, specifically what's happening globally, because we've got a South African audience. It would be really nice to benchmark what are we doing. Why do you feel that there could be more burnout in South African PR professionals than what's happening internationally, and just talk about the different roles that people play.
Oresti, it comes down to the expectations that's placed on the PR professional. And unfortunately, in South Africa, we have a storied history where one person needs to do the entire job. Where in the US or in Europe, that would have been a team of people completing this task, getting it done together, each one with a specialized function. In South Africa, communications professionals are expected to be very versatile, to be well versed in almost every aspect of communication, from strategic direction all the way through to media production, and that's going to put a lot of stress on one person. And I don't know if anybody here wants to chime in on that and confirm what we suspect, that communications professionals in South Africa are tired and stressed out because they're expected to do absolutely everything. And what goes nicely with Fran's wish for South Africa to evolve towards a more professionalized industry, communications profession, is that also if we could specialize our roles, that would help a lot.
Yeah.
If we can make that the norm and have people not expect one person to be everything from A to Z, that could go a long way to relieve the pressure of communications professionals.
Yeah. I do think, though, just to be devil's advocate here, you're right. When you specialize, obviously a heart specialist is always, understands a heart a lot better than an ear, nose, and throat specialist at the end of the day. So specialists play a role. But I do think, especially as junior people, kind of running different departments and different silos actually teaches the guys a lot more and gives them a lot more information at the end of the day. So you can learn the different disciplines, you can learn the different structures, you can learn the different stuff. But I hear you in terms of it does put a lot of pressure on the individual, especially with the younger guys. But sometimes general practitioners are also needed within that particular space.
That's very true. That's one thing that had me concerned about this year's research, actually, is that if we look at the demographic profile alongside the roles, is that many practitioners are older than 50 years, and they are still fulfilling every single role. They are still doing everything from strategic alignment all the way through to the tactical implementation, actually typing out and emailing the press release or typing up a Facebook post and everything in between. So in South Africa, the current situation is that even with all the much more experienced professionals, we're not seeing a delineation in senior management, junior levels of practice. We're seeing one person doing everything from the most senior tasks to the most junior tasks. That's scary.
Yeah. And I don't think it happens just in South Africa. I think my experience is that yes, where there's economies that there's enough money around it, I think it works a lot better than like emerging economies such as ours, South America, etc. But I do think that we need to on Francois' point about professionalizing the industry a bit more, we need to kind of look at that and not undervalue our services. Brent,
Yes.
you're going to say?
Yes, I think, I mean, I'll be quoting Richard Magnell, older MEC chair, as well. One thing he always stresses is that, and I think this may speak to our current situation. Yeah. The PR comms teams are tiny. They've got small budgets. They're not really valued, only when there's some crisis do they really get valued. But it's because I believe we don't know how to show that true value to the leadership of our organization. So they don't value us, because we don't really know how to prove that value. And this is, again, why things like the principles and the framework, so that we can show them, listen, you're spending $1 million on advertising. With my 10,000 Rand budget a month, I'm getting much better results for you. In that case, we make ourselves more valuable. We get a bigger budget. We can employ more specialized people.
Yes.
And this is the thing why we end up in a situation. There's only budget for one person. So you're going to do all the junior work, all the senior work. There you go, because you don't know, how do you prove your value to me? I mean, I'm just thinking of Elon Musk's email to the federal government workers last week. Just respond with 5 things you achieved last week. Only a third of them has responded. It takes 5 minutes. So, we need to show what we're achieving, and we need to prove it.
Yeah. I got a really cool WhatsApp from a friend of mine. He says, I never thought Dodge would affect me personally. My wife asked me to email her 5 things I did around the house last week by midnight. Yeah, so no, absolutely valid point. We have one more question. Let's see if we can answer that before, if we go into that other article that you wrote, Tersia, around a look into the future. So, Ed, if we can just have that last question, so that we can just answer it. But while that's still coming up, no more questions. Sorry, I thought there was one more question. So Tersia, we in the report, we spoke about that 50% are familiar with the Barcelona principles, 40% were unaware. But what was really the other interesting bit was that the people that were actually doing some PR professionals, whether they agencies or within the brands or governments, 79% measure outputs, and I think that's really cool. 53 outtakes and 47 outcomes. So
Yes.
that's what we have here. There's a maturity that is happening. Do you want to elaborate on your thoughts around the future of that evaluation as a final talking point?
I think what's good for everybody is that we're seeing year on year an increase in awareness of the principles, an increase in awareness of the framework and the components thereof. And as a result, we're seeing an direct increase in the actual utilization, which tells us once people know about it, once they understand it, they are keen to use it, they want to use it. And going forward, I can only imagine, Francois, I'm sure you'll agree, that this will only keep snowballing. We wish it would happen a bit quicker and faster, but year on year, it does grow. And we can see that if we had quantitative measurement.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, what we also need to take into account, like you said, Tersia, we want to let it happen by tomorrow. But from a particularly a South African perspective, remember our public relations industry is one of the oldest in the world, with PRISA being established, 70 years odd ago. AVEs has been around since the 1930s. So it's almost 100 years. Nothing's really changed there. So people's fallen into their path of least resistance, and it's been around for 100 years. So we need to unlearn bad practices and then adopt the new practices. So yes, it's 100 years worth of history's worth of behavior we are trying to change. So yes, it's taking longer than what we want, but the reality is it needs to happen.
Yeah, well, fantastic.
Whether people like it or not, it's happening. So you need to.
Yeah, absolutely, jump on the horse. So, guys, I mean, I think the one final thing from me is thank you everyone for attending. Tersia, for your input as usual. Francois, for your insights. And I think one of the big things that we get asked consistently from brands and PR agencies is, okay, so here's your analysis, so what? And when you're starting to give objectives and you're letting us, giving us more insights into what you want to try and achieve, it's easier for us as a brand intelligence firm to actually give you that so what than if it's just numbers at the end of the day. But I think, if anybody wants a workshop, Ornico's available to workshop it with yourself and your clients or the internal marketing teams to try and get them to the level and show them that actually it is, it's not that difficult to get there, and it's not that costly, and it's kind of quite simple. It's not as time consuming as you may think it is. So thank you very much. Thanks for responding to our surveys. I think that's really important, and that's why we've had this. And thank you to everybody for attending. And then I say thank you very much for your questions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.